The scan results came back in 0.4 seconds. Commander Vreth stared at the display for 11 seconds without moving. That was unusual. Vreth was not a being who stared at anything. He was a being who acted, who decided, who commanded. 12 years leading the Advanced Survey Corps of the Dominion Fleet had made him precisely that kind of mind. Sharp, decisive, unbothered by complexity. But the display was showing him something that did not fit any category he had been trained to use. He called for his chief biologist. Her name was Selah. She was the finest xenobiologist in the Advanced Survey Corps, possibly in the entire Eastern Fleet. She had catalogued the biology of 41 species across 9 star systems. She had written the definitive analysis of the Threk endoskeleton, which was still considered the most structurally complex biological architecture ever recorded. She was not easily surprised. She looked at the display for 4 seconds. Then she sat down without being invited to. Vreth let it go. He had a feeling he was about to do something similar. The planet below them was called, by its inhabitants, Earth. The Dominion had been watching it for 6 years. They had been preparing the invasion for 3. The tactical assessment was straightforward. The species had no energy weapons, no orbital defense grid, no faster-than-light travel, no hive mind coordination, and no biological augmentation of any meaningful kind. They communicated through electromagnetic waves and physical writing. Their cities were soft. Their vehicles burned refined ancient carbon pulled from the ground. By every standard metric the Dominion used to evaluate civilizations, they were a Category 2. Developed enough to have infrastructure worth capturing, primitive enough to fold within 8 planetary rotations. The resource assessment was exceptional. The planet was rich in metals, in water, in biological diversity, in atmospheric oxygen. The Dominion High Council had already approved the territorial claim. This survey mission was a formality. Vreth had run 4 of them. They always ended the same way. He had expected this one to end the same way too. He had not expected Selah to sit down on his command deck without permission. She pointed at a secondary reading, a specific subsection of the biological scan, the one that catalogued the internal chemistry of the dominant species. Vreth looked where she was pointing. He sat down too. The thing that made no sense was the cortisol response. Every species the Dominion had ever catalogued showed a predictable hormonal pattern under threat. The body detects danger, chemicals flood the system, response capability increases temporarily. Then the chemicals clear, and the body enters recovery. Rest, repair, depletion. It was universal. It was so universal that the Dominion had built entire invasion protocols around it. You push a species hard enough, long enough, the body chemistry collapses the resistance for you. It was not even a tactic at this point. It was just biology. Inexorable biology. The human response pattern did not do that. It spiked, yes. It flooded, yes. But it did not clear. It recycled. It fed back into itself. Under sustained threat, human chemistry did not deplete. It adapted. The hormonal loop became self-sustaining. And then, and this was the part that made Selah sit down, it changed the brain, not metaphorically, structurally, physically. The neural architecture of a human under extended extreme stress was measurably different from a human at rest. New pathways formed, old inhibitions disengaged, the capacity for pain tolerance increased, the capacity for threat assessment increased, the requirement for sleep decreased, the willingness to continue moving toward danger, rather than away from it, increased. In short, the longer you fought a human, the more dangerous it became. Vreth had never encountered that before. In 40 years of military service, in 41 catalogued species, he had never encountered a biology that responded to extended combat by becoming better at combat. He told himself it was an anomaly in the scan. Selah ran it again, then a 3rd time. Same result. He told himself it was an edge case, a biological outlier that affected some small subset of the population. Selah pulled the demographic spread. The response pattern was consistent across sex, age, body type, geographic origin, and genetic heritage. It was not an outlier, it was the baseline. He told himself it probably did not matter in practice, that biology and battlefield reality were different things, that a species could have interesting chemistry and still collapse under superior firepower. Selah, without saying a word, pulled up the secondary file she had opened while he was talking. It was the historical archive. the one the survey drones had assembled from intercepted human communications, databases, broadcasts, and written records going back approximately 4,000 years. She had already run the analysis. The question she had asked the analysis was simple. She had asked it to find any conflict in recorded human history where a technologically or numerically superior force had fought an extended campaign against a human population and achieved total suppression. The analysis had returned 0 confirmed examples, not few, not rare, 0. Every time in 4,000 years of recorded history that a human population had been pushed into sustained extreme resistance, the resistance had continued, sometimes for decades, sometimes across generations, sometimes after the original combatants were long dead and their children had taken up the same fight, and their children after them. There were cases in the archive where the occupying force had eventually withdrawn not because they had been militarily defeated in any conventional sense, but because the cost of maintaining control had simply never stopped. The human population had never stopped. They had been outnumbered, out-equipped, starved, bombed, subjected to conditions that should have, by every biological model the Dominion used, produced surrender, produced collapse, produced the kind of civilizational exhaustion that makes a species lie down and accept its new reality. It had not produced that. It had produced 4,000 years of uninterrupted, self-sustaining, biologically reinforced refusal. Vreth looked at the archive. Then he looked at the biological scan. Then he looked at the archive again. He was beginning to understand why they fit together. He called a senior staff meeting. He told himself it was precautionary. He told himself he was being thorough. He told himself this did not change anything, that the council had made a decision, that his role was execution not analysis, that Sela was brilliant but perhaps too easily impressed by anomalies, that he had run 4 of these and they all ended the same way. His senior staff filed in: Tactical Chief Morvac, Intelligence Officer Dren, Medical Lead Osa, Logistics Commander Pella, all competent, all experienced. All here because Vreth had personally selected them for exactly this kind of mission. He showed them the scan without comment. He showed them the archive without comment. He watched their faces. Morvac, who had directed ground operations on 3 Category 2 civilizations, got to the historical 0 result and stopped scrolling. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he said quietly that he wanted to review the combat engagement records specifically, the ones that showed the human physical response during sustained fighting. Vreth gave him access. Morvac read for 6 minutes. When he looked up, something in his expression had shifted. Not fear exactly, something more like the face of a soldier who has walked up to a fence he thought was decorative and realized it was load-bearing. The specific record he had stopped on was from a conflict approximately 80 years ago by human reckoning, a ground campaign in a cold northern region of the planet. The archive had drone footage, thermal imaging, signal intercepts. The record showed a human unit, outnumbered significantly, cut off from supply lines, operating in temperatures that should have been physiologically limiting, fighting continuously for what translated to approximately 11 days without confirmed sleep cycles longer than 40 minutes. On day 11 they had counterattacked, not retreated, not surrendered, not collapsed. They had counterattacked. And the counterattack had succeeded. Morvac pulled a second record. A different conflict, a different continent, a different era, same pattern. Then a third. Osa, the medical lead, had gone very still. She was looking at the chemical data from the scan, specifically the section on the human healing response. She asked, with a careful kind of control in her voice, whether anyone had looked at the secondary immune cascade yet. Nobody had. She pulled it up herself. The human immune system did not just repair damage, it catalogued it. Every significant injury, every pathogen, every physical stress beyond a certain threshold was recorded at the cellular level and used to recalibrate the system's future responses. A human who had been seriously injured was, in a specific biological sense, harder to injure in the same way twice. A human who had survived a disease was, in certain cases, completely immune to that disease in perpetuity. A human who had trained under physical duress showed bone density, tendon integration, and cardiovascular capacity that exceeded the baseline of their species by measurable margins. Osa set down her reader. She said, very quietly, that by her understanding of the data, a human soldier who had survived multiple engagements was not just experienced. It was biologically different from a recruit. It had been physically rebuilt by its own history of damage into something the original scan at recruitment would not have predicted. The room was quiet for a moment. Dren, the intelligence officer, pulled up the communications intercepts. The ones from human military units. The ones that had been flagged during the initial survey as linguistically interesting because the humans communicated about danger in ways the translation algorithms had initially struggled with. He had figured out why the algorithms struggled. The humans were not communicating about danger the way other species did. Other species used language that conveyed urgency, fear, tactical assessment, resource management, the need to preserve life and withdraw from untenable positions. Human military communications under fire used different language structures. They communicated about holding, about not giving ground, about the person to the left of them and the person to the right of them, about finishing something. There was a recurring grammatical construction in dozens of languages across the archive that translated, awkwardly, as something like "I will not be the one who stops." Not "I cannot stop." Not "stopping is impossible." Not "someone must continue," but "I will not be the one." It was a choice, a continuous, renewed, biologically turbocharged choice, made under conditions designed to eliminate choice. Dren closed the file. He said that he had spent his career analyzing species communications for signs of weakness under pressure, for the linguistic tells that indicated a population approaching its limit. He said that in 40 years he had never analyzed a species whose communications under maximum pressure were structurally indistinguishable from its communications under routine operations, that the human soldiers in the worst footage in the archive sounded, linguistically, almost identical to human soldiers on a training day. He said he did not have a category for that. Hella, logistics, had been quiet through the whole meeting. She was a numbers person. She thought in supply lines and resource curves and projected attrition rates. She finally spoke and said that she had been doing projections during the discussion and she wanted to share one. She put it on the main display. It was a projected campaign timeline. Standard Dominion invasion. Category 2 civilization. She had used conservative estimates generous to the Dominion side on every variable. Troop numbers, equipment superiority, logistical advantage, air dominance timeline, urban pacification rates. Then she had applied the human biological variables from the scan and the historical behavioral data from the archive. The projection did not produce a victory timeline. It produced a cost curve, a rising self-compounding cost curve that did not have a ceiling she could calculate, because the variable it could not account for was a population that did not approach a biological limit under sustained pressure. Every model she used assumed that sustained pressure produced increasing returns toward capitulation. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. She had run the human data through 6 different models. Every model produced the same result. A cost that started high and kept climbing without a natural terminus, not because the Dominion could not win engagements. It could, it probably would, consistently, at the tactical level. Superior technology made that almost certain. But winning engagements was not the same as ending the war. The humans would not let it be the same. The room sat with that. Vreth looked at the planet on the external view display, blue and white and green turning slowly in the dark. Soft cities, carbon-burning vehicles, electromagnetic communications, Category 2 by every standard metric. He had looked at this planet 3 weeks ago and seen a straightforward operation. He had seen resources and territory and a population that would accept its new reality within 8 rotations. He looked at it now and tried to hold on to that assessment. He could not. He found himself doing something he rarely did. He found himself trying to think like the thing he was looking at. Trying to model what 4,000 years of that biology, that chemistry, that "I will not be the one" structure would produce. Not just in soldiers, in everyone. In the species as a whole. What a civilization looked like when every member of it was built, at the cellular level, to persist, to adapt, to be quietly, continuously rebuilt by every hardship it survived into something more difficult to stop. He thought about the archive, the 4,000 years of zero confirmed total suppressions. He thought about the scan, the biology that turned sustained threat into a training program. He thought about the communications, the linguistic structures that did not distinguish between pressure and routine. He thought about Pella's cost curve, the one with no ceiling, and he thought, for the first time in his career as a commander of Advanced Survey Corps operations, that he was looking at something that did not have a clean end, not because the Dominion lacked the power to fight them. It did not lack the power. But power was not the variable. The variable was what happened to a species, at the cellular level, when power was applied to it, what happened to a species whose biology interpreted maximum threat as a renovation project. Vreth made the call. He logged the mission status as category exception. He filed a full data package to the High Council. The biological scan, the historical archive analysis, Pella's projections, Sela's secondary findings, Osa's immune cascade data, Dren's linguistic assessment, all of it. He wrote a 2-sentence summary for the Council in the covering note because he knew the Council preferred brevity. The summary said, "The target species does not respond to sustained pressure by approaching capitulation. It responds by becoming more resistant to pressure. Recommend indefinite hold on all invasion planning pending full Council review." He transmitted it. Then he stood at the external view display for a long time, alone. After the staff had returned to their posts, the planet turned below him. Blue and white and green. He found himself wondering, and he could not stop himself from wondering, what they had been through. In 4,000 years, what had happened to a species to produce that chemistry? What had been done to them, or what they had done to each other, or what the planet itself had subjected them to, that had selected so consistently and so completely for that particular biology, that particular refusal. He wondered what it felt like from the inside, to carry a body that responded to someone trying to break you by quietly, systematically making you harder to break. He wondered whether they knew they did it, whether they understood what they were, whether they looked at each other and recognized what he was only now recognizing from orbit. He suspected they did not. The archive suggested they spent a great deal of time underestimating themselves, doubting themselves, fearing things, worrying about things, struggling with things that seemed, from the outside, almost trivially within their capacity to survive. But then something would push them past a certain point, and the biology would answer. And whatever had been pushing would eventually find that the thing it was pushing had become, quietly and without announcement, something it was no longer equipped to push. Vreth looked at the planet. He thought about filing a request to the Council to reclassify the species. Not Category 2, something new, something that did not have a box yet in the Dominion's taxonomy. Something that acknowledged that technological development was not the only axis that mattered, that a species could carry Stone Age tools and a biology that no empire in the known galaxy had ever successfully broken. He thought about what name to give the new category. He looked at the planet for a long time. He could not think of a name that was adequate. He closed the display and gave the order to withdraw to safe orbital distance. Standard procedure for a category exception. Give the Council room to decide. Give the survey team room to breathe. But as the ship moved, Vreth stood at the rear observation port and watched the planet until it was small enough to hold between his thumb and forefinger. Blue and white and green. Soft cities. Carbon engines. Electromagnetic signals. He had looked at that planet 3 weeks ago and seen something simple. He would never make that mistake again.